Today you're going to learn the most fundamental skill every mid laner has to master, wave management. Let's take a look at the step-by-step process that will enable you to maximize your effectiveness. Your main goal as a mid laner is to carry your games. To do that, you have to get your items earlier than your opponents, and that's why farming is so crucial. A lot of players, as they learn mid lane, think that getting as many kills as possible is the quickest way to get ahead. But I need you to remember that 16 to 17 CS is the same as 1 kill in the terms of gold value. What that means is that learning how to CS effectively will most certainly get you ahead in all games, even if you don't score any kills at all. It's important to know that this CS gold tracking will only work through early game and on laners, as jungle camps are worth different amounts of gold even though they count as 4 CS. As for laners, the amount of cannons that spawn in waves go up as the game progresses, and cannon minions are worth more gold as the game goes on, starting at 60 and ending at 90 by around 17 minutes. At 15 minutes, cannon minions spawn every 2 waves, and at 25 minutes, cannon minions spawn every wave. You should be aiming to get 10 CS per minute, but it won't be achievable every game, because you might be against a lane bully or have high pressure from the enemy jungler. So 8 or 9 CS per minute is still pretty good. What you will notice is that even though your lane can be 0-0 and it might seem even, if you're 30 CS ahead of your opponent, that means you're pretty much a full small item ahead and will win every single trade. Let's see what that actually means in terms of numbers. Example 1. You're roaming around the map a lot and have 2 kills and 40 CS at the 10-minute mark. In the meantime, your lane opponent was farming uncontested and has 90 CS at the 10-minute mark with 0 kills. Who's actually ahead in this situation? If we do some simple math and we assume that 1 CS gives you about 17 gold and 1 kill gives you 300, your total net worth is about 1275. At the same time, your lane opponent who was farming uncontested would have at least 1500 net worth from CS and around 300 more by getting 2 bars of turret plating, amounting to over 1800 net worth total. That being the case, your lane opponent is not only ahead in terms of net worth, but he's also going to be about 2 levels higher than you. If you're playing a weak early game champion like Veigar, Anivia, or Vladimir, you want to stick to the safer playstyle and wait for opportunities to present themselves and punish enemies when they overextend. In summary, you really need to remember one simple thing. Going for greedy plays and roaming can work in some games, but it's a very risky strategy, which in the long run is not as effective as learning how to become the master of CS and stomp your lane. Some champions that are very strong early on and have incredibly good mobility, such as LeBlanc, Zed, or Talon, are the exceptions to this rule. If you're playing such a champion, roaming after you push your wave to the enemy turret is a good idea. However, if you are going to miss out on a ton of CS if you roam, then the opportunity cost is simply too high, which will surely make you fall behind most games. What you need to take away from this is that proper wave management is the only way to make roaming work. The most basic type of practice you can do to warm up for games, or simply to increase your ability to CS, is log into a custom game without any bots or players, and simply try to get 100 CS for every 10 minutes of the lane. This is something that will enable you to have better awareness of exactly how your champion can CS at different stages of the game, which will ultimately lead to better CS mechanics when you do play ranked. I highly recommend practicing CS this way until you can get 10 CS per minute each time you try. Once you've gotten to the point where each time you practice in a solo lobby, you reach the 10 CS per minute goal, it's time to move up to the next level. Add a bot as your lane opponent and try to reach the same CS ratio again. I recommend starting out against a range bot, such as Lux or Zyra, with skill shots, so you can learn to CS while dodging their projectiles and trading. The laning stage is a crucial part of League of Legends that a lot of pro teams recruit unknown players only because they were able to stomp tier 1 pros in lane. This goes to show that if there's only one skill you need to master in League, it is laning. Macro knowledge is key as well, but learning to be a dominant laner will surely make you climb fast. That's why it's important to put in the work in custom lobbies, focus on one thing at a time, and build your way up, so you can really flourish once you start grinding ranked. First, let's talk about freezing. Manipulating the minion wave in order to stay in a certain position, usually close to your tower, is called freezing. It's one of the most complicated types of wave management, since you constantly have to pay attention to both your and the enemy's minion wave. It's best used if you are ahead of your opponent and want to extend your advantage even further by making him lose CS or overextend and put himself in a dangerous position. In order to freeze, you want to let your opponent push and last it as late as possible. That way, you're making sure that the wave is going to be pushing towards you. Once the wave has reached this position, you want it to stay in, close to your tower, just outside of tower range. You want to make sure there are 2 to 3 extra minions in the enemy wave. If there is more, you want to thin the waves by killing the extra minions. It's important to kill the minions at as low of health as possible while freezing, so that your wave doesn't push back too early from your tower. Once you've successfully managed to freeze the wave, your next goal is maintaining the freeze while zoning your opponent off of the farm by being aggressive whenever he goes for a CS. To maintain the freeze, there has to be at least 2 or 3 more minions in the enemy wave at all times, since your next minion wave, the reinforcement, is going to arrive at the lane faster than your opponent's, which means the next wave could naturally start pushing towards your opponent if there are no extra minions. If your opponent tries to break the freeze by killing a few minions, it's important to act immediately and match the action, killing the same amount of minions, keeping 2 to 3 extra in the wave. Now we're going to take a look at good times to freeze. If you're ahead and you don't want to roam, you can extend your advantage by zoning your opponent. If your other lanes are winning, they'll most likely be pushing a lot, so you won't really be able to roam, and in those situations, the best thing to do is freeze the wave to extend your advantage by zoning your opponent, forcing him to overextend in order to get some minions. Since he'll be overextending, your jungler will be able to gank easily, and the gank will most likely be successful. If you do this properly, your opponent is going to fall so far behind, and they won't even be able to come back into the game. Another option of when to freeze is if you're getting camped by the enemy jungler. This has probably happened to you a lot, and it can be really frustrating, but now you'll learn how to successfully deal with it. If you're getting camped by the enemy jungler, chances are you're pushing the lane a lot, being too aggressive, or your champion is really immobile. Either way, freezing properly is a really effective solution. By freezing the wave, you're making it almost impossible for the enemy jungler to gank, since you're going to be so close to your tower. This way, you'll be able to farm safely without having to worry about the enemy jungler. It can also be really good to freeze when you're playing an immobile champion and your flash is on cooldown. If you're playing one of the champions like Malzahar, Anivia, or Syndra and your flash is on cooldown, you need to be extra careful. Some of these really mobile champions like LeBlanc, Talon, or Kassadin might be able to survive a gank even if their flash is on cooldown thanks to their mobility, but as an immobile champion, your flash being on cooldown means that you will most likely die to any gank. To prevent that from happening, you want to freeze the wave and stay close to your tower. This way, it's going to be nearly impossible for the enemy jungler to gank. Freezing doesn't always have to happen while you have a lead. If you fell behind, the enemy mid laner is likely going to try to play very aggressive and try to kill you. You want to prevent that from happening by freezing the wave close to your tower. It might be a little bit harder to do since you are behind, but it's still possible. By doing so, you're making sure you stay alive and farm safely, so you can come back into the game. As long as you're healthy enough, your opponent won't be able to kill you, since you would risk taking a lot of damage from the tower. Obviously, the enemy mid laner might decide to roam instead, so it's really important to let your teammates know as soon as he leaves. If you're not able to follow, push the wave out immediately so he misses a lot of CS, and you might even be able to get a few turret plates to get back into the game. Another good time to freeze the wave is if the enemy mid laner is recalled and you want them to miss a lot of CS. If you are able to freeze the wave, naturally, their minions will kill most of your minions since they have more of them, and the enemy will lose out on a lot of CS and XP. By doing this, you create the advantage in terms of gold and experience, which will make you a lot stronger than your opponent. Sometimes you might want to freeze if you want to recall and you're not able to push the wave all the way up to the enemy tower. If you're out of mana, low HP, or afraid of the enemy jungler, simply just can't push fast enough either, this is a good option. If the enemy wave is in the middle or on your side of the lane, you want to make sure it stays there, or you can slowly push towards you. But make sure it doesn't push too fast. You don't want the wave going under your tower. To make sure it doesn't push too fast, stick to the rule of having 2 to 3 more minions in the enemy wave. However, you'll only be able to do this if there is an equal number of minions in both waves, or there are more minions in the enemy minion wave. Now let's talk about the situations where freezing is a bad idea. If your opponent roams a lot. Freezing while your opponent is roaming is a really bad idea, since if you do it, he will be able to roam and make a lot of plays without losing a lot of CS, and his tower will stay healthy. Instead, you want to either follow the enemy mid laner or push the lane immediately, get a few tower plates, and make him lose out a lot of CS. As a mid laner, you also have to remember you need to roam a lot, especially on assassins. By freezing and leaving the lane, your wave will build up and slowly start pushing towards the enemy mid laner, naturally freezing close to his tower, and killing a lot of enemy minions. To prevent that from happening, you should always push the wave to the enemy tower before you roam, or if you aren't able to push it out, then let the lane go even so the minion loss is the same for you and them. Making sure the minion wave doesn't freeze close to his tower, he can't follow your roam, and you'll be back in time to farm the next minion wave. By pushing the wave to the enemy tower if you're able to make sure the next 2 waves start pushing towards you later, creating a big minion wave which will slowly push towards you. This is called bouncing. We will be using this term later in the pushing section, so it's useful for you to know what it means. Another time you might want to not freeze is if you're low on health and the enemies can dive you. In this situation, you don't want to freeze since even though you're close to the tower, the enemy mid laner or jungler might just tower dive you. Instead, you want to quickly push the lane if possible and recall, or recall immediately. Another bad situation that you don't want to try to freeze in is if your lane opponent has a lot of poke. If you're going against champions like Xerath, Lux, or Vel'Koz, you might not be able to zone them effectively, so it's a bad idea to freeze, since you'll take a lot of damage for free. Instead, since most of these champions are immobile, you can ask your jungler to gank, go for an all-in, or push the lane and roam. Now let's see when it's a good time to fast push. When your opponent recalls and the jungler isn't nearby, you want to push your minion wave to the enemy tower as fast as possible so he misses a lot of CS. In addition, it can allow you to safely recall without missing any CS of your own. You'll be able to get back to the lane on time, and when the enemy wave is pushing towards you. Or if you don't want to recall, you want to make sure you get the turret plates as fast as you can. Even if your opponent hasn't recalled and you want to recall yourself, you can recall safely by pushing the wave and then getting back to lane to make sure your tower stays healthy and the wave bounces back towards you afterwards, setting up a freeze if you choose to do so. Another good option to fast push is when you want to roam. When you can fast push, you won't lose any minions and your opponent won't be able to follow since he'll be forced to sit under his tower and clear the minion wave, while you will already be getting double kill bot lane or top lane and safely returning mid to catch the next minion wave. It can also be very beneficial to fast push if your opponent has bad wave clear. They won't be able to farm under their tower and they'll be forced to sit under the tower, which enables you to do a lot of things, such as roaming, recalling, picking up blue buff, helping your jungler invade the enemy jungle, or helping secure a neutral objective such as Scuttle Crab, Herald, Dragon, or Baron. Fast pushing can also be really good to set up for a dive. If your opponent is low HP, you're able to either force them to recall, or they have to lose a lot of CS and potentially die if you can dive them under the tower. If they do recall, you'll be able to get some bonus gold from the turret plating, and you can roam as well if you see a good opportunity. If he stays, you'll most likely be able to get a kill and a few turret plates. Either way, it's a win-win situation, and you'll be able to create or extend your advantage even further, becoming one step closer to carrying the game and getting your LP. While pushing can be beneficial to your entire team, it can be especially helpful to your jungler. If he wants to secure a neutral objective such as Rift Scuttler, Dragon, or Rift Herald, sometimes just by applying a lot of pressure and pushing your lane, you'll be able to enable your jungler to secure these objectives by himself, or you can leave the lane after you push it and assist him with the objective. Also, by pushing mid lane, you enable your jungler to counter jungle, and set the enemy jungler behind by stealing some of his camps, since even if the enemy jungler shows up, you will be able to react while the enemy mid laner won't, which will create a 2v1 situation, and you might even get a kill and those awesome double buffs as a nice bonus, or at least force the enemy jungler to retreat. If your opponent is trying to freeze the wave, you can break the freeze by fast pushing. It really is important to push it as fast as possible, so he doesn't have enough time to react and match your push by thinning the wave, to make sure your wave reaches the enemy tower. Lastly, if you can push out fast enough to go into the enemy jungle, to control the map through vision by keeping wards inside of the enemy jungle, you are able to play a lot more aggressively in lane while knowing where the enemy jungler is at all times and playing towards the opposite side of the lane. Now let's take a look at when fast pushing might be a bad idea. If the enemy jungler's around, this can be a bad idea, since you'll put yourself at risk and possibly be forced to use your flash or even die if you get ganked. So it's really important to have good back timing and track the enemy jungler. You also want to make sure that you can push fast enough. You don't want the enemy minion wave to freeze close enough to the enemy tower, which is exactly what will happen if you're not able to push fast enough. Another way of pushing used mostly in the mid to late game is slow pushing. The goal of slow pushing is to create a massive minion wave able to get towers by itself if nobody responds, usually in side lanes, and force the enemy team to react to it. By doing so, you create an advantageous situation for your team, mostly by having a numbers advantage. For an example, if you can get a big minion wave pushing bot lane, one of the enemies is forced to defend it, and you can have a 5v4 situation at the Baron, and you'll most likely win the team fight. To set up a slow push, you want to kill all of the caster minions while leaving melees untouched, having at least 2 or 3 more minions in your wave if the enemy waves are crashing on your side of the lane, and up to 5 if they're crashing on the enemy side of the lane. By doing so, you'll create a gigantic minion wave capable of dealing insane amounts of damage to structures, forcing your opponents to react. After it builds up, you want to make the most out of the numbers advantage you will have by grouping with your team and looking for opportunities such as securing objectives and initiating teamfights. Now let's see when it is a good time to slow push. If you want to siege and get a tower or an inhib in the mid lane or top lane, having a huge minion wave pushing bot will force some of the opponents to respond to that, and naturally you will have the numbers advantage, which will greatly increase your chances of winning the fight and eventually the game. Slow pushing can also be really helpful if you want to go for a neutral objective. Forcing or contesting the neutral objective is a lot easier when your opponents are forced to clear one of the big minion waves and they're not able to be around the objective. If you want to contest Baron or Herald, you want to have a big minion wave in the bot lane, and if you want to contest Dragon, you want to have a big minion wave in the top lane. That way, getting the neutral objective is going to be a lot easier, as your enemies possibly might not even be aware of your intentions, so you might be able to get the objectives uncontested. Slow pushing can also be really helpful in a one situation in the early game to help dive your opponent. By creating a big minion wave, you can easily dive if they're low health and you are ahead, since if they try to fight back, your minions will deal a lot of damage to them, and they'll also lose out on a lot of those minions if they are forced to recall or die. Sometimes slow pushing can be a bad idea too, for 3 main reasons. If you're behind in the early game, you don't really want to set up a slow push. If there's nothing really else to do at the moment, Baron and Dragon are not up, or there are no other towers you could get on the map, you might want to wait for a better moment to use your slow push. Or, if you want the lane to bounce back towards you. This can be really good if you're behind in the late game and you just want to farm near your base as much as possible.